I never thought I'd find myself begging a stranger for shelter. Not at this age, not after everything I'd lost. But as I guided my mule up the frostbitten path toward the cabin, my cabin, if the deed was worth the paper it was printed on, all I could think about was the biting wind and the weight of my own failures. The last of my savings had bought this place, sight unseen, from a man in town who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He'd shaken my hand fast, eyes darting everywhere but mine, and I should have known better. But when you've lost your land, your pride, and the only family that ever mattered, hope becomes a dangerous sort of hunger. I was thinking about my brother Samuel and how he'd always told me, "Dalton, you don't get to start over. The world don't work that way." Maybe he was right. Maybe this was just another cruel lesson waiting to land. My fingers ached as I fumbled the key from my pocket, but I stopped cold when I saw the smoke rising from the chimney. The unmistakable smell of burning oak drifted on the wind. Someone was already here, warming themselves by my fire, burning my wood. Every muscle in me tensed, equal parts fear and anger. I crept up slow, boots crunching in the frozen mud. The door was shut, but not locked. My hand shook as I pushed it open. The hinges groaned, and there she was, a young woman with wild, copper hair and eyes the color of pine needles in summer, standing dead center in the room with a battered skillet in her hand. Her back straightened, chin raised, like she'd been expecting me all along. "Who are you?" I managed, trying to sound like I belonged here. But the truth was, the inside of the cabin looked more lived in than I'd imagined. Clean, for one. There were neat stacks of kindling by the hearth, a faded blue blanket folded on the narrow bed, and the faint scent of lavender cutting through the wood smoke. It was a woman's space now. I felt like an intruder. She didn't answer right away, just stared me down, green eyes unwavering. "This is my home," she said, clear as a bell, not a hint of fear in her voice. "No, ma'am," I said, swallowing hard. "It's mine. I paid for it fair in town. Got the deed right here in my pocket." She glanced at my hand, then back at my face. "Paper don't mean much out here." I wanted to shout, demand she leave, but something in her calm, something in the set of her jaw, made me pause. I could see she wasn't about to be bullied. My anger warred with a strange, unwelcome respect. I'd come here desperate to reclaim something for myself, but found myself face to face with someone who looked just as cornered. "I'm not leaving," she said simply. "And you shouldn't stay." A cold knot of anxiety twisted in my gut. "Is someone else coming?" She didn't flinch. "You should go, while you still can." It was meant as a warning, and something in her tone told me it was more for my sake than hers. For a moment, I hesitated, feeling the full weight of every mistake that brought me here. But I'd be damned if I was running again. "I'm not leaving," I said, matching her stubbornness with my own. Not without answers. She looked at me for a long time, then finally nodded, like she'd known this was how it would go. The silence that followed was thick as molasses, and I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my throat. I tried not to let her see how rattled I was, but the way she stood there, arms folded, eyes locked on mine, made it clear she was no stranger to tension. I eased my satchel off my shoulder, setting it quietly by the door. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm Dalton Keane," I finally offered, as if that might tip the balance in my favor. "I lost my ranch. Bought this place last week from Ephraim Cobb. Told me it was empty." She gave a bitter little smile. "Ephraim sold what wasn't his to sell. Figures." Her voice had a dust-dry edge, but there was a quaver in it too, a strain I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't spent my whole life listening for trouble before it started. She was younger than I'd thought, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes looked older, tired like mine. I glanced around, trying to take in the little details. The cabin was small but well cared for. A neat shelf of canned peaches and beans, a patched apron hanging by the stove, a pair of battered women's boots by the hearth. There was nothing of a man's presence, not even an extra hat on the peg. Everything told me she'd been living here a while. "I got nowhere else to go," I said. "This place is all I have left." She shook her head slowly, eyes never leaving mine. "That's not my problem. I can't leave. Not now. Not for you. Not for anyone." That stung. The anger flared back up in me, hot and sudden. "Ma'am, I bought this place legal. I got every right. Rights don't mean much when you're being hunted." Her voice was quieter now, but harder, like river stones grinding together. You'd be wise to ride back to town before nightfall. That stopped me. I tried to read her, to figure out if she was bluffing, but there was no lie in her. Only exhaustion and a kind of bone-deep fear she was trying desperately to hide. My confusion tangled up with frustration. Was she running from someone, or just crazy enough to stake a claim that wasn't hers? Who's after you? I demanded, trying to sound more forceful than I felt. If you tell me, maybe I can help. She looked away, jaw clenched tight. You can't help. No one can. If you stay, you'll end up just like the last man who tried. My skin prickled cold at that, but I forced myself not to back down. You don't get to threaten me in my own cabin. She snapped her gaze back to mine, fire sparking in those green eyes. I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. For a second, we just stared each other down. Two strangers, both with nothing to lose, trapped by fate and bad luck under the same leaking roof. My anger drained out, leaving only a dull ache in my chest. Whatever her story was, it had teeth. And now I was caught in its jaws. All right, I said, voice softening. I'm not looking for trouble, but I'm not leaving, either. Not until I know the truth. A long silence. Finally, she spoke. My name's Cora Lane, and you'd best keep your voice down. Something about the way she said it, low and certain, sent a shiver through me. The day was already growing short, and shadows crept across the floorboards, threatening to swallow us both. The light was fading fast, drawing long blue shadows across the walls as I tried to make sense of what I'd stumbled into. Cora stood rigid near the stove, every muscle in her body wound tight as wire. She'd given me her name, but little else. Just enough truth to keep me from throwing her out, not enough to trust. I busied myself unpacking what little food I had, not because I was hungry, but to steady my nerves. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension, and I could feel my own heart ticking like a pocket watch left too long in the sun. Then, somewhere out in the pines, a faint, unmistakable sound. Hooves, slow and deliberate, crunching through the frost. I froze. Cora's eyes flashed to the window. She didn't speak, but her whole posture changed. She shrank back, lips pressed in a thin line, all the fire gone from her face. Her hands trembled as she reached for the old hunting rifle propped beside the bed. I moved quietly to the window, careful not to be seen. 3 riders appeared between the trees, their silhouettes sharp against the last scraps of daylight. The lead man sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and cocky, flanked by 2 others who kept their hands close to their holsters. They reined up not 20 yards from the door. Whoever they were, they didn't come for coffee. Cora's breath was shallow, eyes locked on the men outside. I could see it now, the raw terror hidden beneath her stubbornness. Don't open the door, she whispered, voice barely audible. Please. I hesitated, anger and fear wrestling inside me. I'd come here to start over, not to get drawn into someone else's trouble. But something about her plea, something desperate and real, made my chest ache. I nodded once, signaling I'd follow her lead. She edged closer to the wall, gun held tight, and I positioned myself by the door, every sense straining. A heavy fist hammered against the boards. Cora Lane, a voice barked, rough and full of menace. You in there? Don't make us wait. She flinched at the sound, nearly dropping the rifle. That's Marcus, she choked out. Don't let him in. Marcus. The name hit the air like a curse. My mind spun. Was this the man hunting her? I gripped the iron poker from the hearth, ready to swing if it came to that. Another voice, smoother, younger, called out. We know you're in there. Come out, and no one gets hurt. I felt my jaw clench. I'd been a coward too many times in my life, run from too many fights. Not tonight. Not with her looking at me like I was the only shield she had left. I stepped in front of Cora, blocking the door with my body. Her fingers brushed my sleeve, light as a moth's wing. For just a moment, we were in this together. Dalton, she whispered, but I cut her off. Stay behind me. Whatever happens. The door shook under another pounding fist. I could hear the men muttering, boots crunching outside. I braced myself, sweat prickling down my back despite the cold. I'd planned to fight for a home tonight, but suddenly, I was fighting for much more. The door exploded inward before I could draw a full breath, the boards crashing against the wall so hard I thought the hinges would snap clean off. 3 men stormed in, guns drawn and faces twisted by the cold, and something uglier. The leader, Marcus, I guessed, strode in like he owned the place. Big, raw-boned, with a cruel twist to his mouth and the confident swagger of a man who never expects to hear no. His coat was dusty but fine, the kind a cattle baron or a cutthroat might wear, and his eyes flicked over me as if I was little more than an afterthought. "Move aside, stranger," he ordered, voice rough as gravel. "This don't concern you." Behind him, the other two fanned out, one near the stove, the other hovering close to Cora, gun never wavering. The room seemed to shrink with every breath. I planted my feet, poker gripped in both hands. "This is my home," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "And the lady's under my roof. You want something, you ask proper." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You think you can stand between me and what's mine? She's my wife, by law and by right. She ran off, but I'm here to collect her, one way or another." Cora's face had gone dead pale. She pressed herself to the wall, hands trembling. "I'm not your property," she spat, her voice shaking with anger and fear. The gunman nearest her sneered. "Marcus says jump, you jump, girl." I stepped between them, the poker feeling heavier than any rifle. "She's not leaving with you. Not unless she says so herself." For a second, I thought Marcus would laugh. Instead, his face hardened. "I see how it is. Maybe I need to teach both of you a lesson." He turned to his men. "Burn the place. If she won't come out, we'll smoke her." The words chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just a fight over land or pride. These men were ready to torch everything, flesh and timber alike. Cora's eyes pleaded with me, and I saw a flash of old wounds, ones I recognized from my own battered history. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't let another soul get crushed under a man like this, not after all I'd lost. I squared my shoulders. "You want her, you'll have to go through me first." The men hesitated, glancing to Marcus for orders. He grinned, teeth flashing in the firelight. "Brave. Stupid, but brave." Tension crackled like dry leaves in a fire. I braced for the worst, but Marcus just tipped his hat, mock respect gleaming in his eyes. "You want to fight? Keane, you got it. I'll give you one chance. Tomorrow at dawn. Winner takes all. But if you run, we'll hunt you both. And if you hide, we'll burn you out." With that, he motioned his men to back off. One last glare at Cora, a sneer at me, and they left as suddenly as they'd come, leaving the door hanging open to the bitter wind and the acrid scent of fear. The cabin was silent except for Cora's ragged breathing. My hands shook as I set down the poker. I'd just drawn a line I couldn't step back from. Whatever happened at dawn, there was no going back. Cora slumped to the floor as soon as the men vanished into the dark, her breath hitching in sharp, uneven bursts. I wanted to comfort her, but my own nerves were rattling in my chest. Instead, I busied myself bolting the broken door and tossing more wood onto the fire, anything to keep my hands from trembling. We didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was the wind moaning outside and the pop of sap in the flames. When I finally sat beside her, Cora kept her eyes fixed on the hearth, arms wrapped tight around her knees. There was something raw and childlike in her posture that stripped away the fierce woman I'd met earlier. "You know what's coming, don't you?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I always knew Marcus would find me. I just hoped I'd have more time." A heavy silence stretched between us, full of words neither of us wanted to say. At last, Cora broke it with a confession that changed everything. "I'm pregnant, Dalton. That's why I ran. Marcus isn't the father. He forced me into marriage after my folks died, said he'd burn my family's land if I didn't agree. But the child, he's not his. Marcus would kill us both if he knew." Her words landed like a punch to the gut. The cabin, once just a haven from my own failures, was suddenly a battleground with higher stakes than I'd ever known. I saw her trembling and felt the old ache of my brother's loss, the urge to protect someone, to matter, flooding through me again. "Why me?" I asked. "Why trust a stranger?" Cora met my eyes, vulnerability and resolve flickering like candlelight. "Because you didn't turn me out, and because I can't do this alone anymore." That simple truth sank its hooks deep. I thought of Samuel, of every time I'd failed to stand up when it counted. I wouldn't fail again. We sat there as the fire burned down, neither of us sleeping. When the first gray light seeped through the cracks, I rose and strapped on my battered gun belt. My hands were steady now. There was no more running, not for her, not for me. Marcus and his men waited outside, faces hard and eyes gleaming with cruelty. Marcus called out, loud enough for the birds to scatter. Ready to put your life on the line for a whore, Keane? I ignored his venom, stepping forward. We settle this now. Man to man. You win, you take the cabin, and her. I win, you leave, and you never come back. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing across the frozen clearing. Fair enough. But you won't walk away, Keane. I'll see to that myself. As we squared off, Cora stepped out behind me, voice steady but barely a whisper. Dalton, there's something you need to know before you fight him. Her eyes glistened, and in that look, I saw every secret, every hope she'd buried under fear. The moment froze in my mind. Her, clutching her belly, ready to trust her fate to a broken man and a rusty revolver. The duel was about to begin, but it wasn't just about pride or property anymore. This was about a woman's freedom, an unborn child's future, and a man's last shot at redemption. The world seemed to shrink to a pinprick as I faced Marcus Webb in the bruised dawn light. Cora's words clung to me, brittle and heavy, pregnant, running for her life, the child not his. Every instinct screamed at me to watch his hands, but my mind kept circling back to her plea. There's something you need to know. She clutched her belly, silent now, but her gaze pleaded for me to listen before the shooting started. Say it, Cora, I urged, my voice barely louder than the wind. She hesitated, then stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. Marcus killed your brother, Dalton. Samuel Keane. I saw it happen. The world stopped spinning. I stared at her, stunned, as Marcus's grin widened. That true, Marcus? I spat, heart thundering in my chest. He didn't even try to lie. Boy tried to get in my way. Thought he could stop me from taking what was mine. Learn different. He shrugged, as if discussing the weather. You want revenge, Keane? Take your shot. Rage and grief crashed through me like wildfire. I'd spent years blaming myself for Samuel's death, never knowing who swung the final blow. Now, here was the devil himself, daring me to settle old debts with blood. Gun or knife? I called my voice iron flat. Gun, Marcus said, relishing the word. Count of 3. His men backed up, hands hovering near their holsters, eyes hungry for violence. I saw Cora edge to the side, her hand tight on the rifle. We stood 10 paces apart, breath puffing in the icy air. My fingers curled around the revolver's grip, every sense blazing alive. 1. Marcus snarled, already drawing. Time slowed. I watched the muscles in his arm flex, the evil glint in his eye. I remembered Samuel's laughter, the way he used to sing while we fixed fence posts, the way he died alone in the dirt because I wasn't there. My vision tunneled. 2. I whispered and fired. The shot split the air, and Marcus's gun flashed at the same instant. The world exploded in noise and light. Something hot tore past my ribs, but I kept my feet, teeth clenched against the pain. Marcus staggered, clutching his chest, blood blooming like a red flower through his coat. His eyes widened, first with shock, then with a darkness I'd seen in too many men who'd gone too far. He fell to his knees, cursing me with his last breath. You think you're a hero, Keane? You're just another fool doomed to lose everything. His body slumped, still. The clearing went silent. I was alive, barely, but the fight wasn't finished. Marcus's men stared at me, caught between shock and vengeance. Cora rushed to my side, voice breaking with relief and terror. You did it, she whispered. You finally did it. But as the men outside fingered their triggers and the blood pooled around my boots, I knew we weren't out of danger yet. Justice wasn't finished with any of us. The cold seemed to bite deeper now, blood wetting my shirt and the iron taste of adrenaline in my mouth. For one long moment, the world stood still, Marcus Webb dead in the snow, his lifeless eyes wide with disbelief, and his men frozen between fear and fury. I could hear Cora's breath hitch beside me, the wind rattling dead leaves through the pine branches. My hand shook on the revolver, but I forced myself to stand tall, not showing how close I'd come to collapsing. The first of Marcus's men, the one with the scar on his jaw, took a step forward, eyes wild. You killed him, Keane. You're dead, both of you. His partner leveled his gun at me, but Cora acted first. She'd snatched up the old rifle from the porch, and before either man could squeeze a shot, she fired, a single, deafening crack. The bullet grazed the second man's shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his weapon, howling, clutching at the wound. The other, seeing his boss in the dirt and blood leaking from his friend, hesitated just a second too long. "Drop it," I barked, raising my revolver, praying my shaking hands would hold. "Or I'll drop you where you stand." He spat in the snow, glaring hate, but the fight had gone out of him. "This ain't over, Keane," he hissed, backing away. "You think the law's gonna let you walk from this?" But his threats sounded hollow. The two of them dragged Marcus's body back toward their horses, one limping, the other swearing under his breath. They mounted up and vanished into the trees, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and fear. I leaned back against the cabin, pressing my hand to my bleeding side. Cora tossed down the rifle and rushed to me, her hands warm on my face. "Stay with me, Dalton. Don't you dare die now." "I'm all right," I managed, though I was seeing stars. "Just gotta catch my breath." We didn't have long. Minutes later, a fresh set of hooves thundered down the path. I stiffened, thinking Marcus's men had come back for vengeance, but instead it was Sheriff Morrison, flanked by 2 deputies. The law at last. The sheriff swung down from his horse, sharp-eyed and wary. "Heard shooting. Found 2 men in town ranting about murder and theft. Looks like you had yourself a hell of a night, Keane." I straightened, holding my wound and my nerve. "It was self-defense, Sheriff. I've got proof: Samuel's watch, Cora's marriage papers, and a map of Marcus's crimes. Everything you need to know. He wasn't just after a woman. He was running from justice." Cora stood beside me, no longer a trembling fugitive, but a woman ready to face the world with her chin up. "We'll tell you everything," she said. "But please, help Dalton. He saved my life." The law had arrived, and with it, a final reckoning. I glanced at Cora, and for the first time, felt the faint glow of hope in the ruins. Sheriff Morrison took in the scene with a grim nod, his eyes darting between Marcus's corpse, my blood-soaked shirt, and the rifle still warm in Cora's hands. "We'll get you patched up, Dalton," he said, voice gentler than I expected. The deputies hustled inside, bringing strips of linen and a jug of whiskey. Cora cleaned my wound with steady hands, her touch lingering just long enough to steady my breathing. While I rested against the bunk, Morrison inspected the evidence we'd laid out on the kitchen table. Samuel's watch, still flecked with old blood. Cora's marriage papers, corners stained and torn from being folded and hidden. And the map, a crude but damning chart of land grabs, bribes, and names only a lawman would recognize. The sheriff's face darkened with every new detail. "Looks like Marcus's reach went further than we thought," Morrison muttered, eyes glinting. "There'll be more men like him crawling out of the woodwork. But this," he tapped the map, "this gives us what we need." The official wheels turned quickly after that. Morrison sent a rider for the judge, who annulled Cora's forced marriage on account of fraud, threats, and violence. A posse followed the map, uncovering a stash of stolen goods, buried rifles, and documents implicating 6 men in crimes stretching clear to the next county. Marcus's name became shorthand for everything rotten in the territory, and finally, justice felt real. Cora and I gave our testimonies in a packed courthouse. There were whispers and side-eyes, but for once, the truth carried more weight than rumor. Morrison himself vouched for us, and when the dust settled, I was cleared of all charges. Cora's reputation, battered but not broken, was restored. She stood on the steps with me, sunlight catching in her hair as she squeezed my hand. For the first time since Samuel died, I let myself believe in tomorrow. We went back to the cabin, our cabin now, and started to rebuild. The nights were still cold, but Cora filled the rooms with laughter and warmth I hadn't felt in years. When her baby came, red-faced and wailing, we named him Samuel Lane Keane. I looked down at him, swaddled in Cora's arms, and knew this was the life my brother would have wanted for me. Hard-fought, scarred by loss, but honest and new. Sometimes I catch myself listening for trouble in the wind or watching for hoofbeats among the trees. But Cora says that's just the old world clinging to me, and that the past is best honored by moving forward. She's right, I think, as I watch her and Samuel laughing on the porch while the sun sinks behind the pines. The road that led me here was paved with regret and pain, but standing with them, I finally understand what it means to begin again. Not to forget, but to forgive. Not to erase the scars, but to build something worthy on top of them.